What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to another Heart Over Height episode. Today we are going to be discussing the ranking teams 1 through 10 on their pressure in this upcoming season. So if you do enjoy this kind of content, do me a huge favor, smash the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, comment down below what you agree with, what you disagree with. And with that being said, let's get right on into this. So I have this tier list here of 10 through 1, 10 being it's panic mode. You got to win now. You got to do something now. Not necessarily win a championship, but there's going to be some teams here where they're going to be in panic mode because they're just in a bit of a stuck area. So let's just get into this. Let's start off with our first team here. We got the Portland Trail Blazers. I think the pressure is about a 7 for them to do something. You got to think they're at year 4 of not necessarily full tank mode, but 4 years in a row of having very underperforming seasons. Yes, they obviously there were a couple years there with Damian Lillard where he was injured, so they had poor records, but still, with that, then he left, and of course you're in rebuild mode now, but you have 3 centers on your roster: DeAndre Ayton, Robert Williams, Donovan Clingan. You have 3 guards on your roster: Anthony Simons, you have Scoot, and you have Shaedon Sharpe. You got to start figuring out rotations and roles. You have an older player in Jeremy Grant who's probably going to be traded. You traded for Denny Adviha, who solid trade piece. Like, there's some question marks along this roster and the direction of the franchise. So I would say, for fan base alone, the fans want to see something happen here. Your pressure's around the 7 mark. Next up, we have the Memphis Grizzlies. I think their pressure's around a 4. Not too much pressure here. A little bit because of expectation of the Grizzlies being fully healthy and everything like that. But of course, Ja is still getting back to the flow of, the game once he comes back from injury. So I don't really see too much pressure there. I think there's pressure on other players to help boost the roster, i.e. Desmond Bane. There's a little bit of pressure there, but overall, not too much pressure, I would say. Next up, the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think their pressure is round a 2, not too much pressure. Finally, the fan base is seeing success in the playoffs. First time in, over a decade that they have seen success. So, overall for them, plus they have one guy that's going to be the face of the NBA pretty soon, Anthony Edwards. So I like their very little pressure. Philly, in my opinion, is a 10. The pressure is on. You brought in Paul George, right? It didn't work with Embiid, with Ben Simmons, and Jimmy Butler. It didn't work with James Harden. It hasn't worked time after time after time, and it's starting to question whether it's the rest of the guys or is it Embiid. So this is probably the last straw that I personally have as a fan of, saying Embiid, he's a fantastic player overall, sure. But in the playoffs, he always gets injured. He just is becoming one of those injury-prone guys that isn't going to be there. So he's going to be great in the regular season, winning 50, 60 games, getting an MVP, sure. But what does that relate to in the playoffs? Absolutely nothing. Getting bounced in the first round here time and time again. Not making it to the championship time and time again. Next up, we have the Boston Celtics here. I think the pressure is on for Jason Tatum specifically. So I think that they're going to be around the 3 mark. Of course, they just came off a championship, so that alleviates a lot of the pressure. But Jason Tatum needs this season to really perform. He needs to go prove the haters wrong kind of thing. And then pressure-wise, they kept a lot of guys and everything like that. The expectation, though, is championship. So that there is a little bit of pressure there. But I wouldn't say it's nowhere near some of these other teams. Next up, the Dallas Mavericks. I think that their pressure is around the 5 mark. I don't see it as too much pressure just because they did over the expectation there last season was not the finals, and then they made the finals. So I think you're in a good spot if you're Dallas. If you don't make the finals this year, I don't think it's an unsuccessful season by any means. The thing with pressure here is can they fulfill replacing Derrick Jones Jr.? And then what does Klay Thompson provide you? Is he, it's kind of boom or bust. So that's an interesting role there that we'll get to see this upcoming season. Next up, the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think there is a decent amount of pressure here. I think it's about an 8 because you got to start making decisions similar to Portland with multiple guards and multiple bigs and everything. Cleveland over there with Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, as well as Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, of course. So there's going to be some decisions that need to start being made because Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell don't really play well together. Jared Allen, Evan Mobley clogged the paint. So if they get off to a slow start, they might be looking to make moves quickly with these other guys. Next up here, we have the Pelicans. This one is kind of tough because I still believe that they're not done. I do think that Brandon Ingram is going to get moved. But I do believe there's a little bit of pressure here. I'll put them in the 7 category. Actually, I'm going to move them up to an 8 because of Zion. I think this is similar how I've been talking about LaMelo Ball and the Hornets. If Zion has another season where it's kind of just mediocre because he's missed time here and there, and you invested that number 1 overall pick into this guy that's supposed to be a generational talent, you got to start looking at maybe Zion is the issue. Maybe you look at his value and see what you can do there. But yes, I do think that there's a little bit of pressure here because they need to start succeeding. Okay, you've put together the young roster. Cool. What are you going to do with it? Kind of thing. It's becoming the 8th seed year in year and year out is not really doing much for you. So you're kind of in this mode where you're getting stuck in the West, in the middle of the pack, because you're not bad enough to where you're getting a really good pick, but you're not good enough to where you're succeeding in the playoffs. Next up, the Atlanta Hawks. I think the pressure is definitely around like a 4-ish. Trae Young's pressure is around a 9 for me. I think that he's got a lot of pressure, but I think the rest of the roster is in a different wavelength. I think the rest of the roster is in rebuild mode, and then there's Trae Young. There's a bunch of question marks around this roster and the direction that they're going. I hope that the less is more theory works a lot for Trae Young, where he has lesser valuable players, but he makes them better around him. And he doesn't need superstars around him, like DeJounte Murray, for example. So, yeah, I would say there's a little bit of pressure here. Not too much, though. There's definitely pressure on Trae Young, which is why they're so higher up on this list. Next up, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think they're around the Timberwolves. They're getting that playoff success. There's not too much pressure. Their roster got a lot better. And to be a 1 seed and to have a better roster coming into the next season, especially since your guys are all young and growing together, I don't see there. Honestly, I'm going to move them down to the 1 spot. I don't think that there's any pressure here at all for the Thunder. I think that they're expected to just go out and play basketball. There is no expectation on championship now or bust. They've got their guys. They've got their core. Everything. It's all there. They have a roster built for championship contention, of course. And should they be contending this next season? I do believe so. But if they don't win it, or if they don't make it to the finals, if they make it to the Western Conference Finals, it's not a failure of a year, I don't believe. I think there's still success here as the players are just getting older and developing more. Because let's be honest, it was rookie seasons last year for some of these guys. Cason Wallace, rookie. Players like that, you can't expect them to be champion, in a championship mode. There's going to be those struggles, of course. So next up here, we have the Sacramento Kings. I think there's a lot of pressure on this team. I think the pressure's around a 9. You've seen a lot of just mediocre finishes to the year. 8 seed, 7 seed, 6 seed, somewhere in there, and it doesn't lead to any playoff success. Similar to the Pelicans, stuck in the middle, the Sacramento Kings are in that same boat. Is DeMar DeRozan really the fixture that is going to boost you to championship contention? I understand the idea of making moves and everything, and I'm happy that they finally made a move and didn't just re-sign the entire roster like they always do. But the Kings need to start winning games in the playoffs. They had one good series against the Warriors, and that's all they have to show since 2006. And they didn't even win that series against the Warriors. Next up, we're going to talk about the Miami Heat here. I think there's a decent amount of pressure just on Jimmy Butler and the rest of the roster itself. I think that Bam is alleviating a lot of this pressure to where he's playing phenomenal for Team USA, but Jimmy Butler and he is going to go out and ball out, I assume, because he's going to want one last massive contract before he ends up retiring here. So with him specifically, he's going to go and try and get that bag. So you could see a huge jump from the Heat from last season's seeding standing to this season. I could see them being all the way up into that 3rd seed, so he's more eligible for more awards and stuff like that. Versus when they're right around the play-in, they're not looked at as such a, threatening squad. Next up, we have the San Antonio Spurs. I don't really think there's too much pressure here. I'd like to see Vic's jump and just see what, I'd say he's around the 3 mark. The Spurs themselves are around the 3. Still in rebuild mode, of course. They are somebody that's going to look to just develop Stephon Castle. Of course, Chris Paul's there for some veteran leadership. You still got guys like Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson on the roster for now. And then Harrison Barnes there for some veteran leadership. And then you have Vic. It's a decent roster. It's not the worst roster in the league. Definitely not great. Not going to win you a championship. But, and I think that if they were to take a leap or they were to make a play-in or something like that, there is no pressure for them to win any games. If they make the playoffs, I think that's a huge success. If they make the play-in, I think that's a successful season. If you're back down in the bottom, there might be a little bit of question marks as to why didn't you go more all in this offseason, everything like that. But of course, it's only Vic's 2nd season, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Denver Nuggets, there's a decent amount of pressure here, probably around a 7. The pressure surrounding Jamal Murray and his fit, he's been playing poorly for Canada. You got Michael Porter Jr. with his question marks on did they way overpay the guy. You lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. You replaced him with Russell Westbrook. How is that fit going to do? And to go from a championship contending team to where they're at, the 4 seed, is that really, if they have another 4 seed kind of season, do you look to switch things up because you need to be back into that championship contention while Jokic is still, in his prime? Next up, the Hornets. I'd like to say that there's a decent amount of pressure on these guys. They're just kind of one of those just mediocre teams that just hasn't gotten better time after time after time. I'm going to say that the pressure's around a 6 for them, though. Although they're still young and developing, they need to start taking leaps. LaMelo Ball is the big question mark. If this season doesn't go well, to where they're at least an 8 seed, I think you look at trading LaMelo. I have said that time and time again, and I will stand by that. They're in the Portland Trailblazer situation where they're just have been bad for so long, but we need to start seeing things for the fans. The Hornets have great commentators. They have a great fan base, but there's zero structure over there. And LaMelo Ball, if he's your guy, then he can't be getting injured and missing a quarter of the season, half the season, to where you guys are a bottom of the league team in every category. Yes, I hope that we get a massive jump out of Brandon Miller and, he fills into that Paul George-esque role that he's been compared to from his draft. But will that actually happen? We don't know. Next up, we do have the Indiana Pacers here. Now, Indiana's an interesting team. I don't see them having a lot of pressure. I think that they're around Minnesota, young, exciting team, just growing and developing. Similar to Dallas, I feel like they overreached what they would have normally reached had the circumstances been a little bit different with New York with some injuries and the Bucks with some injuries and so on and so forth. But they have Pascal Siakam locked down. They have Tyrese Halliburton locked down for a few years. They are developing chemistry. For only half a season, Pascal was there. So to have a full offseason and then other guys taking leaps like Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith, Obi Toppin getting better each and every day, you got to look at there is zero pressure on this squad. The pressure is going to be on the other Eastern teams here that aren't necessarily playing or getting better. I'll get to a few of those. Orlando's up next. I think Orlando's pressure is around a 3. I would say not too much pressure on the squad. Of course, they're still young, still developing, still working on that 3-point shooting to surround Paolo and Franz Wagner. I think that they need to look at getting more of a bigger center. Someone who could stretch the floor. If Brook Lopez wasn't so expensive, first-round pick is what I'm hearing, I would go after somebody like him for them. But, of course, then you got to look at you want somebody younger to fit that timeline and everything. But I think that Paolo's got something special. So you might want to just take a risk and just go get your guy that fits now so you can win now. Next up, we got Detroit. I think their pressure's around a 6. They have to improve, of course, from last season. 28 straight games, losing streak right there. We can't see that again, of course. Cade Cunningham, I think there's a little bit of pressure on him here too. Of course, he needs help around him and everything like that, but overall, I think Detroit and Cade, this is a pivotal year for them where you might move off of a guy like Jaden Ivey so you can go get a sniper three-point shooter for Cade Cunningham. I understand guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. are over on the roster now, but still, you need shooters around Cade Cunningham in order for this roster to be successful. Next up, we got the New York Knicks. The pressure is about a 5. I think that a lot of the pressure comes from Julius Randle's pressure alone, whether he fits the roster itself or not. But overall, I don't think that there's too much pressure just because you do have your guys who have developed enough chemistry. Even if there is a bit of championship pressure there, it's alleviated by the fact that these guys have played together for a while. So I don't think that it's going to take long at all for this roster to get going. And whether that's with Randle or without, he's either going to quickly realize he's a part of this roster and he can fit, or quickly realize he cannot and he'll be out the door soon. Next up, we got the Lakers. I think that their pressure is always going to be pretty high. With LeBron being towards the last few seasons, we assume, of his career, with Anthony Davis and LeBron having 2 of the healthiest seasons that they've had in a while, you got it. And then they made the playoffs, they made the play-in. Like, that can't happen. Now, one thing I do like is the fact that they did not go out and go make any free agent signings. They re-signed Max Christie, but that's it. I like that for them because they can finally develop cohesion together. They haven't had an opportunity. Every offseason, it seems like they're always trying to make a big splash move to get them their next guy, and sometimes you just need time to make the roster work. So I do actually really like this move for them. It almost alleviated some of the pressure for them, but still, again, LeBron's over 40. So the pressure's there to win now. The Clippers are such a confusing roster. I want to put them higher, but I'm going to say around an 8. I think that, of course, losing Paul George, you know what? No, I'm going to bump them up to 9. The pressure's there definitely for them. Losing Paul George was a bit of a stinger, especially since they chose to let him walk. He wanted to play for the Clippers. They let him walk because they didn't want to give him the money. So it's on them. Then you go out and you give James Harden a massive deal, $70 million. Like, I don't understand that really. You have this like last chance. You just build a brand new stadium, so you're gonna want to win. And so I don't understand why they didn't bring back Paul George. That place would have been electric. It's still going to be exciting. Will Kawhi be healthy? Again, could be part of that less is more theory, but we won't know until we see it. The Bucks. I think that there's a ton of pressure on the Bucks. I think they're around Philly where the pressure's on for them. They're just older and older and older, and this season's really going to prove whether the Dame and Giannis duo is going to work. But the problem is everyone around him injury prone and old. Like Chris Middleton missed a lot of the season last year because he was hurt. Brook Lopez, not the youngest guy on the roster, of course not. Overall, like, you got some pieces here where you have Dame, you have Giannis, you got a solid backup in Bobby Portis. Like, there's players here that are cool and, like, obviously all-star caliber in Giannis and Dame, but can you put it all together and compete against Boston, who just won a championship, or Indiana, who got better, or Philly, who got better, or Cleveland, or the Magic, who got better? Like, there's all these rosters here that got better. You guys didn't. That's a question mark. Chicago Bulls, there's definitely some pressure here to make some moves. The Zach LaVine thing, as far as a successful season, it's just, I guess, developing those young guys. seeing, so I guess that'll drop you down to like the 5 mark. I just think that there's some pressure because you put so many eggs in Zach LaVine and Vucevic and everything like that, and you're going to get pennies on the dollar for them. So there's pressure in that sense where you have to try and get something salvageable for Zach LaVine and or Vucevic. Like, you got 2 second-round picks and Chris Duarte for a guy that's been an all-star in DeMar DeRozan. 2 second-round picks for a guy that's a clutch player of the year candidate. So there's some pressure here for sure for the Bulls. Next up, the Raptors. I think that they're actually doing all right. I think they're around Indiana where they could take a leap like Indiana. And because they've got pieces there. They've got Emmanuel Quickley. They've got R.J. Barrett. They've got Scotty Barnes. They've been rumors in Brandon Ingram trade talks. Now, will he actually pull the trigger and go trade for Brandon Ingram? I don't know. But as of right now, even this roster, they have Jakob Poeltl still. They've got Grady Dick, the developing young player. There's players on this roster that can develop, and if they take a leap, and, you know, Emmanuel Quickley obviously got his bag. R.J. Barrett has been looking phenomenal for Canada. I like this roster. Is it deep playoff contention? Probably not. But if it happened, would it surprise me? I'd need to see a leap out of Quickley and R.J. Barrett for sure, but no, it would not. Next up, the Phoenix Suns. I think that there is some pressure here as Kevin Durant is rising in age. And, of course, you invested a lot of money into Bradley Beal. Now, I brought this up the other day on one of my prior videos in saying that Bradley Beal, they should think about bringing him off the bench. And you have a lineup of Tyus Jones, Devin Booker, Grayson Allen, KD, and Yusuf Nurkic with Bradley Beal running the second unit. Like, that's a solid idea to me. But there's definitely pressure here when you do pay a guy $50 million in a season for him to perform and for it to work for your roster to try and succeed. You were a 6 seed last year, didn't do much in the playoffs, so there is some pressure there to succeed now. Golden State. Golden State, of course, because Curry is getting up there in age, there is some pressure. They're, again, a team that's becoming stuck in the middle with the Kings and, like I said, with the Pelicans. Those squads that are just hanging around that 8 to 10, even like 6 to 11 spot, where they're just being stuck. Their pick is not good enough to be great and go get a superstar caliber player from the draft, and it's not championship contending roster right now as they just lost Clay, and you know they've talked about trading Kuminga possibly in the Lauri Markkanen sweepstakes, and who knows what their roster looks like come trade deadline. But overall, there is some pressure definitely on the Warriors to try and win another championship while Curry is still on the team. The Brooklyn Nets, I don't think that there's too much pressure on them. You got your 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges. You're probably going to look at trade packages for Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith. So you're in full rebuild mode. And then you just hopefully you get Cooper Flagg. That is Brooklyn's number one priority right now, is to focus on Cooper Flagg for this year's draft. Washington in my eyes is similar to, like I was saying with those bad teams, the Atlanta Hawks, for example, San Antonio, where they need to start stringing together success, or Portland was the best example, sorry. Washington is falling into the Portland category as well, where they both are just poor rosters. There's nothing super exciting about them, and it's just confusing. You signed Jonas Valanciunas. You drafted Johnny Davis years back. That was terrible. You trade Denny Adbiha, who I thought was pretty solid for y'all. You have Bilal Coulibaly, which is a big question mark as to what he can be in the NBA. Of course, you drafted Alex Sarr. Didn't look great in Summer League, but he's the number 2 overall pick for a reason. So overall, there is some pressure here. It's about in the middle, about a 5, because I expect that they're just going to be bad again. Go get another pick. Hopefully he turns into something. But at some point, the fans are not happy. Of course not. At some point, something's got to change there. Next up, we have the Utah Jazz. Utah is in quite the interesting spot. I think that their pressure is around a 4. It all is centered around Lauri Markkanen. What are they going to do with him? If they keep him, I think the pressure goes up. You need to perform then. Don't be like the Bulls, hold on to Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan too long, and then you don't get value for him. Because Lauri Markkanen is a great player, but so are DeMar and Zach LaVine, and look at what they're getting you. Right now, you have an opportunity to get like Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, and picks from the Warriors, which is exactly what you need, young players and picks. But if you keep Lauri Markkanen, then you got to try and succeed with him. So there's just a bunch of question marks there. And last but not least, the Rockets. I think they're around the 6th spot. I think that there is some pressure here with this roster just to take another step. You've continued to take some steps. Now just take one more. Get yourself in the playoffs now as a solid 6th seed or something like that. Or even play in and make the 7th or 8th seed. But you're developing Reed Shepherd, of course, being your number 3 pick this year. You are developing Cam Whitmore still. You got some young talent on this roster that is kind of fitting in well so far. Of course, you got question marks in either Jalen Green or Alperen Sengun. We assume one of those two is going to be traded. If it was me, it would be Jalen Green I would trade. I would try and keep Sengun, but I understand Sengun's value is probably higher. So there is some pressure here to just kind of retool this roster a little bit so that they can get that much better if you do decide to trade Jalen Green or Sengun. But same thing as what I said about the Bulls and same thing I said about the Jazz. Do not hold on to a player's value if you're not going to utilize him. Like Jalen Green specifically is a 6-man spark plug, or on a roster like Brooklyn would be like Cam Thomas. Like just a firework, just pops off, scores a ton of points, everything like that. So overall, guys, as you can see, there's a few teams with a ton of pressure. Then there's, of course, a few teams with very little pressure to none. So if you guys do enjoy this content, do me a huge favor. Smash the like button. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Comment down below what you guys think about this list here. Pressure 10 being so much pressure, 1 being 0 pressure, absolutely none. So, guys, it's been another Heart Over Height episode, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.